to the Wild Wisdom Podcast with Dr. Patricia Mills. I'm Dr. Patricia. This podcast is for people who want to transform their health, restore their hormones, and reconnect to their body's natural wisdom. Hi, I'm Dr. Patricia. I'm a Canadian medical doctor, published author, internationally recognized researcher, and passionate advocate for your health. Here, we'll explore the intersection between ancient wisdom and cutting-edge science, distilling the essence of true health into practical steps you can take. Wild wisdom is instinctive knowledge in action. Thanks for making this part of your day.
Today, we are going to be talking about balancing hormones. And my guest today is Dr. Patricia Mills. Welcome to the show.
It is such a pleasure to be here, Madelaine. I've been really looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
I'm really looking forward to this because, not going to lie, without giving out my age, this is probably a highly relevant conversation, basically for anybody, I don't know, 30 plus, let's just say, just to not anyway, how old I am here, but I think it's highly relevant. And I don't think we talk about this topic enough. So not going to lie, I'm super personally interested in learning about this.
Oh, I'm so glad. That means you're probably going to ask really great questions, which really fuel the conversation so well.
Yeah. So before we dive into it, let's build some context for our listeners. Tell us a little bit about you and your background, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah, thank you for asking. I think it's so important. So when you hear information, you get a sense of where it's coming from, and the foundational knowledge. Is it trustworthy or not? So I'm a Western trained medical doctor. I trained at University of Toronto in Canada, and then did my specialty in physical medicine and rehabilitation at the University of British Columbia in Canada as well. And I actually was doing work with people who had fairly significant neuromusculoskeletal diseases, so spinal cord injury, ALS, MS, multiple sclerosis, everything down to autoimmune conditions, really looking at the holistic rehabilitation of these individuals. And I was also a researcher, published over 25 publications. I think I'm hitting my 30th soon. And so I had this skill set of being able to look into the research and really determine what's good quality research and what isn't, and distill the essence of it. And I would do these systematic reviews where I try to explain the essence of a topic to the scientific community or to the lay person, right? So, everything was pretty good. And then what happened was I was on the spinal cord injury ward working as the doctor there, where people have their spinal cord injury and they're still not yet discharged to the community. Very complex medicine. And I received the worst call of my life, where my dad had been diagnosed with ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. And that's amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. It's a fatal disease with no cure. The muscles just slowly start to shut down, including your breathing, eating muscles. And so you pass away from this condition, right? And the average lifespan is around 5 years, or even maximal kind of lifespan, because you can die pretty quickly from it, or you can live a little bit longer. And, I just was so paralyzed at first, cried my eyes out for a few weeks. And what kept hitting me was the question, why? He was an Ironman. So he raced, he cycled, he ran, he watched what he ate. He was quote unquote healthy by all North American standards, right? And so it really came as a surprise because we had no family history. So as I was doing everything I could for him from the Western medicine perspective, I just kept thinking, okay, there must be a reason, right? This doesn't just happen. Okay. And I had some kind of idea that maybe it was related to maybe it was a lack of certain nutrients, because there was some, when I went into the research, there was some research on vitamin B12 and ALS, So I started going deeper into nutrition, because in medical school, we're taught minimal, like macronutrients, protein, fats, and carbohydrates. And it was when I started to do my own kind of continued learning, independent learning, which I find that in the world of Western medicine, Doctors are so busy. We're taught what we're taught. It's within a certain sphere of knowledge. And typically, it's only when you get sick or someone you love gets sick that you're really motivated to go beyond that, because you're already pretty busy in your life. So to go beyond that, you need to have a pretty strong motivation, right? To spend like your extra hours, extra waking hours and prioritize it. So I dove into nutrition. And as I dove in, my research skills became very helpful, where I would like go down a rabbit hole of information until I felt like I had kind of exhausted it and really understood it. And that rabbit hole would kind of span many different areas, actually. So instead of just being Western medicine, it would go into nutritional sciences and even health technology and ancient cultural wisdom in terms of how to properly prepare your food so that you actually have access to the nutrients that are in them, all the way through to traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, all these things. So I found it so fascinating. And this research is being done by very good quality universities across the world. So it's there to be found if you have the tenacity and, the patience to keep doing it, which I did, very motivated by what was going on with my dad. And I got to know nutrition pretty darn well. I'd say that's still like my big, strength now. And as I was going through the research, I was finding other things like, emerging health technologies, cutting edge science, understanding of body parts and organs that we weren't taught in medical school, like the microbiome in your gut, the lymphatic system that drains your brain and does a self-cleaning at night. Like things we're just not taught, but are super crucial and relevant to so many conditions we're experiencing these days, right? Hidden infections, those kinds of things. So as I was doing this deep dive, I started to notice that I was not in the best of health, as a woman in my late 30s, many different reasons, like the stress from my dad. Now I realized I was eating what I thought was a healthy diet and actually was not a hormone supporting diet at all. It's, yes, label wise, it seemed very healthy to the standard American person, but it actually was not hormone supporting. And, my natural systems of detoxification were kind of overburdened by factors like having been on the oral contraceptive pill, plus a lot of processed foods. And these were things that at the time I didn't understand were causing problems with my detoxification systems, which are so important for hormone balancing because you detoxify your hormones through your liver and your gut, right? So I was getting sicker and sicker. And at the time, I didn't understand, what do I mean by sick? I like, to the external person, I looked well. So probably you can relate to this, right? Like anyone looking at you is like, you look super healthy. You look really well. And inside you're feeling like, you know what? My energy just isn't the best. My menstrual cycles are off. My skin isn't looking the way it used to and the way I know it could, My weight is certainly harder to manage, even though I'm doing all the same things, or I'm trying harder even, and it's just not responding, right? My sleep is like, I can't fall asleep easily. I can't stay asleep easily. My hair is getting thinner. It's like a little bit drier, all of these little things. And if you were to go to the doctor, the kind of doctor that I was, right? They'd be like, oh, that's normal. That's aging. And then so I was experiencing that and I was like, okay, this is normal. This is aging. My menstrual cycles are like so terrible, like hemorrhagic, bleeding heavily. I happen to be the kind of menstrual cycle irregularity where I get really painful. Like I would have to chew ibuprofen for 4 days to deal with my menstrual cramps just to get out of bed, And then it was when things started happening with my skin and my weight. So like I started getting rash on my skin, like a dermatitis for me. Other people, it shows up as acne or rosacea, like there's different ways that this shows up in your body, but the skin is like a mirror of your internal organs, basically. And my weight, like I had children and I just couldn't kick the weight. I felt puffy and I just I felt like I was wearing an extra layer on me that didn't belong. And I just so badly wanted to just peel it off, right? So as I was researching things for my dad, I started paying attention to women's health. And because I am a woman, I really understood it and I really wanted to get to know it. And so I finally, as I was reading more about hormones and the way that they're interconnected in the body, because in medical school, we're taught about like here's the ovaries, there's a thyroid, there's the adrenal gland, there's the gut. And you actually have like separate people in charge of those organs. So if you have a problem with your gut, you go to a gastroenterologist, and if you have a problem with your thyroid, you go to endocrinologist, and those two are so intricately connected. So there's no like linking of the dots, like connecting the dots. So because I wasn't staying in one lane, I was really just casting a really wide net, and so thirsty for this knowledge, I started to connect the dots and find threads of truth. I would read a research paper with this kind of like open mind, just looking to see like what makes sense with the body as I know it. And, what kind of adds to this picture that I'm building. And so I'm always adding to it. However, at this point, I feel like I know that I have enough information to change things around because I did it to myself. I totally changed my hormones. I rebalanced my hormones. I detoxified, like I naturally supported my detoxification systems very intentionally. I did strategic supplements, right? I made some very crucial lifestyle shifts, which are very important. I became like really good at reading and interpreting ingredient lists on food, which is actually the most important thing, not like the protein fat breakdown, but like what's the list on your ingredient, the ingredients in what you're eating, and how does that impact your body, in a foundational way. So when I got the results for myself, I started to like share them with my family and my friends. And to those who were motivated, so there's a difference between getting the information and acting on it. And I found that the ones who acted on it were just so getting these amazing results. And then what happened was I was like, okay, well, I need to start sharing this in a more structured way. So then I started to do women's health online programs kind of on the side while I was still working in my Western medicine kind of role as a specialist. And I found that that was so rewarding and I loved it so much that I've actually, at this point in time anyways, left the Western medicine practice. So I was faculty at the University of British Columbia, like staff, assistant clinical professor. I've resigned from that. I've published my last study in the field that I was previously, I'm in the middle of doing that right now as we speak, actually to tie it up, to do a final kind of collaboration. And I'm turning my focus entirely on women's health because, when your body feels balanced and your mind feels calm and focused, and every body part is working well and interconnected, life is easier in every way. And because my life was so hard because of all of this for a period of time, I just want every woman to experience this. And I do believe it is our birthright and it's not our story. Yes, it's common for people to be feeling this way, but it's not normal.
So I have a question. So that actually ties lovely into my question, which is, can we just kind of talk a little bit about life stages and like because I think the way that I'm understanding, is like, okay, I'm going to go into perimenopause and then I'm going to go into menopause and I'm going to have hot flashes and, my vaginas may or may, I may have some dryness there and like, there's going to be these changes and like, they're normal changes associated with perimenopause, menopause. Like, I think that's the message that we as women are kind of like, oh, you're in puberty, you're having a period. Well, that's normal for you to feel all these things. But is it? Like, so can we just maybe like have a chat of like, okay, yes, these are some changes that are going to occur hormonally that like we expect these things to happen. However, what are normal symptoms and what are perhaps flags that tells us, hey, we need to take a look at something here?
That's such a good question because a lot of women don't even know that there's an opportunity to seek help and to feel better because they're experiencing what they've been told is normal. And again, what I would like to say is that having any significant issue, like, okay, let's dive into what that means. Okay. So like it's what I think is common is these issues that you talked about, right? Common is premenstrual syndrome, premenstrual tension, menstrual irregularities, increasing issues with fertility, and then having those hormonal imbalances that like change your libido, and then maybe even get you into menopause earlier. And then the menopausal transition is very rough, and some silent suffering goes on, or not so silent suffering. And that can last for like 15 years or like, never seems to go away into menopause. That's common in the Western, world. But because a lot of the world is following Western ways of living, that seems to be increasingly more global. I was born in Brazil, and when I go there, I see the changes from when I was a little girl to now, that there's distinct changes that have happened to women and men. But of course, we're speaking of women. So what should happen? So what happens is that what you need to understand is that the hormonal rhythms are created by a very beautiful kind of orchestra between many organs in the body. Like the brain sends messages through. Hormones are messengers. They're like signaling systems. They would be like when we were mailing letters, they would be like the letters that you mail. And when the person receives it on the other end, there's instructions like, please clean your home, or, please do this work. Okay. So that's basically, it's like your brain is like putting letters into your blood and sending it throughout the body. And it arrives at organs like the thyroid. It arrives at organs like the ovaries. It arrives at the adrenal gland, and the thyroid makes the thyroid hormone, which regulates energy. The ovaries make the sex hormones like estrogen, which is like your fertility, vum, curvaceous hormone, progesterone, which is your chill hormone, and your pregnancy supporting hormone to be able to get pregnant and stay pregnant into the first trimester. Testosterone is like your libido and muscle mass hormone, which we do need as women, just not as much. And then the adrenal glands are super, super interesting because they make your stress hormone, cortisol, and kind of like your fight or flight hormone, adrenaline, like that very quick, like let's really quickly run away from the tiger. And the adrenal glands are also capable of making the sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, which becomes crucial in menopause when your ovaries retire and your adrenal glands take over. Okay. And all of those systems are interconnected. For example, the estrogen goes to the thyroid and tells the thyroid to pick up its activity. The cortisol, the stress hormone, goes to the thyroid and basically turns down its activity. Okay. So you can become hypothyroid just from being overly stressed out because your body is asking the adrenal glands to make more cortisol to deal with that. Okay. And also the other connection there is that the building blocks for making estrogen and progesterone and testosterone are the same building blocks for making cortisol. And so if you are someone who is experiencing a lot of like physical or emotional stress and your body has to make a lot of stress hormone cortisol, what that do is it uses up the building blocks for those crucial sex hormones. And in a short period of time, that's not noticeable, right? Like if you run a race and you make more cortisol to deal with that race, but then you finish the race and you calm your body down and you get back into relaxation response, your hormones are not unbalanced. It was a very short period of time. However, if it's day in and day out, that's what's going to happen is you're going to be draining your progesterone. That gets hit first. And then over time, you're unbalancing your estrogen and testosterone. So that leads to hormonal imbalance. That's the stress portal. Okay. So there's two major portals to unbalancing your hormones. Okay. There's actually three major portals. One is the stress pathway, which I just explained. Okay. And I'll go into the other two portals, but I want to tie what I just explained to what you said, because what happens is that if you have really beautiful coordination of the brain, the thyroid, the ovaries, and the adrenal glands, and the gut is an endocrine organ. It's an organ, like a body part that makes hormones. Actually, it makes a ton. It's often the most hormone producing organ in your body. Okay. Which is kind of mind blowing. Not something we're taught in medical school. Okay. So if they're each individually healthy and they're talking to each other properly, like if you have a company, you want each worker to be healthy and communicating properly, right? So you need both things happening. What happens is, let's say you're that individual where everything is really working very well. When you're young, you go into puberty, and your transition into puberty is like, oh, I've got my period, right? And your breasts are growing and your hair is forming. And typically it's not like too young, right? So like, what's too young? Well, it used to be that like it was around 11 to 13 was like pretty normal puberty age. Now it's becoming more common to have younger puberty in women and actually later in boys, okay, but younger in women. And there's lots of reasons for that, but that's common, but not normal. And then you're supposed to have there's fluctuations in the month that are cyclical. And it's like, if you think of like a tide where there's an up and a down and up and a down. And it's not that down is supposed to be bad. Being on the low tide is not a bad or a good thing. It's simply being on the low tide, and what that experience might feel like normally is your hormones are at your lowest point when you're menstruating. So hormonally, you're at your lowest point. What that means is energetically, you tend to be more like inward focused rather than outward focused. So like less energy, quote unquote, but not in a bad way, more of like inward focusing. You're more like a little bit more withdrawn from the world, a little bit more paying attention to what you're thinking and how you're feeling and kind of assessing what your needs. And then you're sort of protecting yourself from over scheduling because you are a little bit lower energy. So you would like take a break a little bit from things like you wouldn't exercise heavily, you would maybe do some like walking in nature versus like big, strong, big runs, which you would save for your like high tide, which is your ovulation, which is in between the two menstrual periods. Like when you menstruate to when you next menstruate, between that roughly is when you ovulate. And that's when your hormones are at your highest point. And so you have your highest energy, you're most energetic and magnetic. And that's when you're most likely to feel like connecting with others, like being, hosting dinners or going out for parties or that kind of stuff, right? So there would be this natural ebb and flow in your energy, which you would know and respect. Like in the ancient traditions, they would have what's called the red tent, right? And sometimes we've given that some negative connotation, but actually it was a beautiful practice where women had a place where they could withdraw to and kind of rest, right? And take a break at a time when their energy was lowest and they were, just didn't feel like being around a lot of people and doing a lot of work. So it was like kind of like a nice little break. You could think of it that way. Okay. So it's like we have our figurative kind of red tent time. And then what would happen is that you would normally have your menstruation. It wouldn't be painful. It would bleed. It wouldn't be too dark or too spotty. It'd be like a nice flow. For the first couple of days, it would be heavier. And then it would peter off and it would last. So around 5 days from the first day of bleed to the last day of bleed, you might experience like a twinge of like discomfort around the abdominal area, but not anything painful. And then that would go away. And then as the further you would get away from your period towards your ovulation, your energy would be climbing. Okay. And then you would burst out in energy. It's like the summertime of the month, back into the winter time. Okay. During menstruation. So that would be that would be a normal experience, right? So no PMS, no irregularities. You'd be pretty predictable. No in between spotting, right? That's normal. And then around the age of like 50, right? 50, 55 or so, you would start to notice some changes. So your periods would start to become more irregular. You might notice like a few energetic shifts, like instead of like these big ups and downs, it might become more gentle, like a tiny little wave instead of a big tide, which is actually like cool because you're kind of becoming a little bit less up and down and kind of a little bit more steady. So in a way, it would be like stepping into a new higher power in a different kind of way, like a new phase in your life. And you might notice you might notice your skin's looking a little bit different and maybe your weight's a little bit different. But actually, normally what happens is that at that time, the ovaries start to retire and the adrenal glands take over. And if the adrenal glands are healthy and that they have not been overburdened with the task of producing so much cortisol, they would be up to the task. And there would be a period of adjustment, just like you have a new employee. And an old employee's like, here's how you use the Xerox machine or the fax machine. And, it's like, oh God, like here comes the fax machine. This is really hard. So at first there's a period of adjustment. And then after, a few years, maybe a couple of years at most, the adrenal glands would take over. And if you were to imagine a chart, your hormones would be at a certain level, fluctuating up and down. And they would drop a little bit. It'd be a little bit of a roller coaster ride, but then it would settle out at a lower point than before, but not down in your boots low. And it would be balanced. Because the thing about hormones, it's not so much how much you have. It is important, but it's how much you have relative to each other. So some people speak about estrogen dominance. And that's a kind of a lay term word. Doctors don't really like that because you can actually have low estrogen but have more estrogen than you have progesterone. And so you're in estrogen dominance, but strictly speaking, you still have a lot of you still don't have a lot of estrogen. Right. And so with a good, healthy menopause, you would have this kind of relatively smooth transition into menopause. It would be different in terms of less big fluctuations in your energetic kind of state. And after a year of not having a period, you're technically menopause, you're in menopause. Okay. And there would be shifts that you would do. You would be better at certain things, right? For having this new kind of untethering to this monthly cycle. And other things would be different. You would no longer be fertile, right? And then there are certain things in the ancient traditions, they would have certain things natural lubricants, right? For a little bit of vaginal dryness and that kind of stuff. So you would be using these tools to compensate, you do oiling of the skin to help the skin stay moist, because you do tend to do a little bit of drying out, right? And in Ayurveda, they do the oil packs for the hair, right? So you'd be doing these things to compensate for a little bit of the dip, but it wouldn't be super drastic like it is these days, And the thing about hot flashes is very interesting, because hot flashes, for example, happen when, if you pay attention, hot flashes tend to happen when you're in cortisol dysregulation. So usually in a time of stress. So something has mentally or physically stressed you out, and that triggers a hot flash, because actually hot flashes are known to be due to the brain being active in a certain way in terms of physical or emotional stress. And that creates a cascade of hormonal changes, including increased cortisol. And that generates a hot flash when you're going through all of these other menopausal changes. So if you're someone who has really good stress coping mechanisms and you've been employing them for a while, and you've kind of have some grounding in terms of trust, in the universe, and that kind of for some people, it's a spirituality, just a sense that everything is happening as it should. And you've got your breath work and meditation, and you have all those things. You're way less likely to experience things like hot flashes, because you're less likely to be triggered by an external event in a negative emotional reaction kind of way, which will then cause this brain to adrenal gland signaling that then generates experiences like a hot flash.
It's so interesting. I wanted to just pop in here because you obviously know I'm training in somatic work, and it's so interesting when I have my personal sessions and we're working with nervous system dysregulation. I have, most of us are going to experience some form of trauma or stress, post-traumatic stress that we hold on to. Maybe not necessarily traumatic, but post-stress dysregulation. And it's so interesting because as I go through sessions and we move through, we're looking for those temperature changes because those are cues of sympathetic activation. And so when I'm working through something and I'm starting to really kind of go into the stress of the experience or the memory or whatever, I will get what feels like a hot flash. I will say, like, I am sweating here. Like, it is really hot. And it has this like quality of like a whooshing upward kind of, like the heat comes somewhere from the core and it just whooshes up and I just start to get hot and agitated. And that's like, and that signals to me, oh, there's some sympathetic activation here. And then as we move through the session and we begin to regulate the nervous system, then I'll start to notice, oh, I'm not as hot now, or my temperature, like, there's not sweaty now, it's cold and clammy, or, I'm noticing, my hands are changing. And those are physiological signs that I, will look for when I'm working with the nervous system. So I just thought that was really interesting because I've experienced that just sitting, doing nothing, like doing a somatic session, and all of a sudden, whoosh, what feels like a hot flash. I'm like, is this a hot flash or is this just like me working through a thing here?
Yeah, it's so cool that you shared that experience because it really just brings home the point that we can experience, you can like experience a hot flash when you're younger. The difference is that you have a lot more hormonal reserve, and it would take a more intense experience like what you're talking about, where you're intentionally going into, that discomfort, that emotional reaction, and then you're healing yourself out of it with these tools. Women who are in menopause, like perimenopause, they're sort of going through times when remember I said that kind of roller coaster. So sometimes your hormone reserve is really low, right? Because the adrenal glands are like haven't yet picked up the baton, right? And then you have this emotional stressor. And if you've never learned how to deal with it, you just go right into that emotional reaction and experience. And that means that the part of your nervous system that is responsible for dealing with emotional and physical stress, which, as you mentioned, is your sympathetic nervous system, will go into dominance. It'll go into like ascendance. And there's a cascade of bodily events that occur when that part of the nervous system is activated. As a specialist in spinal cord injury, I am an expert in the nervous system because when you are treating humans who have had physical disconnections in their nervous system, you get to see how it all plays out. And these individuals have very pronounced problems with sweating and temperature control, and they'll experience hot flashes and cold sweats and just like drenching sweats, and it does relate to the nervous system, and the nervous system is tied to the hormones, to their direct connections from the brain to these hormone producing body parts, these organs, these glands, right? So there's a chemical connection with the hormones. And then there's a direct physical connections with the nerves that kind of grow out of the brain and the spinal cord and travel to those organs and directly like interact with them, right? So someone who has really good nervous system regulation and has really good methods of dealing with stress, they are going to have a way better experience in their menstrual cycle phase of their life and their perimenopause phase, as well as in their menopause phase, because they're going to be less likely to overactivate their adrenal glands and cause this like cascade of hormonal and neurological events.
I wanted to come back really quickly because you mentioned that there are 3 systems, and we were talking about the stress system impacting. And I'm trying to like take my memory, and I'm like, I don't think we've talked about the other 2.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
And what it is that I didn't want to stray too far from your original question, and now we will dive into the other 2. So the first one is stress, and for some people that's like stress and spirituality, right? Like if you don't have an inner trust that everything is happening for your best and highest good in every moment, you're going to be stressed out. So there's that part, and that's a deeper dive. However, what the other part is strategic nutrition. It's hormone balancing nutrition. It's discovering that the foods that you eat are not about calories. Yes, there are calories. And if you're eating too little or if you're eating too much, then that calorie will definitely have like extreme impacts. But where you're in them kind of like that, not in the extremes, it's not the calories that impact hormones. It's what the calories come with, like how the body processes the food and the hormonal impact that the food has on it. So for example, okay, I'm going to introduce a new hormone into the mix, which is the hormone insulin. And that's the blood sugar hormone. So insulin does a lot of stuff, but what we're going to focus on here is the fact that when you eat something that has a carbohydrate, okay, it gets broken down into sugar, right? Or glucose, but we'll call it sugar. That's a fun word to use. And it gets put into the blood, from the gut into the blood through the lining of the gut. And when it's in the blood, there's like sensors in our body that says, oh, look, there's sugar. Let's tell the pancreas to make insulin. And the insulin is made, and the insulin is like a key that goes into the cells. Like with the sugar is used within the cells. It's not helpful in the blood, right? It's helpful when it gets into our cells. And in order for it to get into our cells, there needs to be a key to unlock the cell door. Okay. The cells are like the little bits that make up all of our tissues. So you open the cell door with the insulin key and the sugar rushes in, and then your blood sugar levels drop down to like normal, right? So they rise with food and they come down. So if you're eating like what I like to call slow carbohydrates, or complex carbohydrates would be another way to call it, is that's food from like vegetables, some fruits that are not too sugary, like apples are good, like examples of good fruits. Avocados are fruit, tomatoes are fruit, but like apples, that kind of stuff. Dates, figs, all that stuff, blueberries, berries, and whole grains. Okay. And when I talk about whole grains, we're talking about like a white basmati rice, an oat, millet, teff, amaranth, wheat. But I'm not talking about the flour. Okay. I'm talking about the grain when it is whole. It hasn't been turned into a flour yet. So it is still packaged in its fibrous kind of shell, like in the fiber. Okay. And what's interesting is that when it's still packaged, so when you eat like a white basmati rice or like a rolled oats that hasn't been turned into an oat flour, the response in the blood sugar is totally different. So when you eat it whole, the body has to take time to break it down because it's not a flour, hasn't been broken down for it. So it takes time to break it down. And as it's slowly broken down, the blood sugar slowly increases. So there's like a slow increase in blood sugar. So then there's like a nice slow release of insulin. And because it's slow, you never reach like a big peak. Again, it's like a nice low kind of wave rather than a massive big tidal wave. Okay. And so when you stay within a certain range of insulin, not getting made too much and too quickly, that creates a balance of hormones. That's a hormonal balance in the body. When you eat fast carbs, which are everything I just talked about has been processed in some way that now makes it way too quickly absorbed by the body. So if it's a whole grain, that would be like the flour. So a rice flour, a wheat flour, an oat flour, an amaranth flour, a quinoa flour, chickpea flour. Okay. All of those are highly processed to turn into a flour. They work like a fast carb where when you have that, your blood sugar quickly spikes up and goes up above the threshold that you would want, which means that the pancreas has to pump out a whole bunch of insulin because sugar in the blood is very damaging. The body does not want sugar in the blood. It's very sticky and it sticks to things and it damages things. So it does everything it can to get into the cell. So it'll just pump out a bunch of insulin, so your insulin levels go really high. And then your blood sugar rushes into your blood, into your cells. And because there's massive amounts of insulin, the sugar rushes in and then your sugar crashes down really low. So it goes from being really high to really, really low. And when your blood sugar is really low, that's a physical stress for the body. What will happen is your body will make cortisol, the stress hormone, to cope with it. So now you have two hormonal dysregulations. You dysregulated insulin and you dysregulated cortisol. And remember, if you dysregulate cortisol, you imbalance over time estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, right? So you could see how if you're having fast carbs for breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, you're going to be going into this like insulin and cortisol kind of yo-yoing effect, which then affects your sex hormones. Okay. And the thing is that it's so sneaky, these fast carbs. For example, if you take a fruit and you turn it into a smoothie, that's a fast carb now. Okay. If you take a vegetable and you turn it into a smoothie, it's a faster carb, but vegetables naturally have less sugar. So it's less likely to be an issue. Okay. Interestingly, even healthy packaged foods like protein bars, they have a lot of hidden sugars. There's about 56 different words that exist for the word sugar on ingredient lists. So it's like maltose, dextrose, high fructose corn syrup, which is one of the most damaging kinds, agave nectar, coconut nectar, brown rice syrup, like all of these things that sound
so
really healthy.
Sneaky. I'm just sitting here and I'm like, that's sneaky.
I know. And the thing is, no one sat down at a chemistry bench and said, we're going to dysregulate women's hormones. They were like, we got to make this stuff tasty and it has to last long on the shelf. Right. So they put it in there and there was like a low fat craze at one point. Right. And if you take out fat, it just doesn't taste good. So they had to add more sugar. And the thing is, you need healthy fats to make hormones. The building block for progesterone, estrogen, testosterone, cortisol is cholesterol. If you go far up enough in the chain. So here we had this double whammy of like not enough fat in our diets. And now research is showing that a low fat diet increases your risk of death of all causes. Okay. So we're recovering from that. Like it's emerging science and people are starting to kind of like healthy fats are good, get your healthy fats in so you can build your brain, which is 60% fat, build your nerves, which are completely fat encapsulated, right? Like electrical wires with the insulation, that's fat is the insulation of your nerves. Every single cell is made of fat. That's the membrane, fatty membrane, right? So here you have this kind of double whammy where you're like looking for the low fat options now, and it comes with like the simple sugars. And the thing is, the words are so deceptive. This is why you have to learn how to read ingredient lists, because if it says organic or if it says natural or if it says smart, it doesn't mean it's good for you. Okay, because a brown rice syrup is natural and it can be organic, and so can agave, nectar and coconut nectar. But those are fast carbs, and they will spike your blood sugar, right? And you'll get into that insulin cortisol dysregulation, and that itself can lead to problems with menstrual cycles, fertility, perimenopause, menopause. And the thing is, like, flour products, like people are really into having like oat flour or chickpea flour because they're afraid of their gluten, right? Which is a fast carb, like the flour-based wheat flours. But all of the other flours are not necessarily better, by the way. And gluten-free products are just full of sugar because they're flour, with rice flour, all these things. And they add sugars to make them taste good because they don't have gluten, which is like a really nice kind of textural thing, right? And you don't have that. And fruit juices, like kids are being given fruit juice. It's not seasonal anymore when the fruit is fresh and you squeeze it and you drink it out of a cup, right? Unpasteurized and just completely raw enzymes and all that good stuff. Now it's like through the year, very pasteurized, very sugary. Even if there's no sugar added, it should not be something that you consume throughout the year. It should be fresh seasonal juices. And we've gone away from that into a year, and I see children who are displaying signs of hormonal imbalance at a pretty darn young age. I mean, type 2 diabetes is the worst kind of outcome of that. And you're seeing that just rampant everywhere. So it's not just, in your 30s and onwards, I'm seeing it in very young children, right? And because I know what to look for, I'm seeing it, unfortunately, quite a bit. And then it's like the sugary cereals, it's the granolas. Everyone's into granolas, but it's full of sugar, and if it's not made the right way. So anyways, those are kind of like tend to be the sneaky bits, is the smoothies, the granolas, the protein bars, the health foods, quote unquote, the gluten-free foods. And that's kind of like, I was like having my smoothie every day, and I would have like my granola, and I would have like my whole wheat toast, and just like, or my whole wheat pasta. And it's just interesting to me that I definitely was one of those people where I thought I was eating healthy, but my body was trying to tell me otherwise. And I just didn't know to listen until I started to find the information that brought clarity to that issue.
I'm just, I'm sitting here and I'm listening, and I'm just like, you just have this really great way of like using examples and metaphors to like bring this all together. And I'm sitting here going like, why the F? Okay. I'm going to try not to swear on the podcast. Okay. So I'm just saying, why the F? Like, are we not like, how is this not being taught to us? Like, I consider myself, just like you said, a pretty healthy person. Which made me curious about the type of smoothie I used to make, which was just romaine lettuce, spinach, half an avocado, lemon juice. It called for a little bit of stevia, so I put a little stevia in it, and then it was just like water. I'm kind of thinking, well, that was probably not as bad because it had no fruit in it, but it would still be considered a faster.
That actually would be pretty good from the fast carbs perspective. That would be getting more into the third pathway, which is the gut pathway. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, we'll chat about that. But I just wanted to just say, like, as you're talking, I'm like, oh, I'm probably not eating as healthy, and like people think I eat pretty healthy, and I consider myself eating pretty healthy. But I think just like these little things you've said, I'm just like, are now going to be like, okay, I need to like rethink some of the things that I'm doing or how I'm prepping the food. And it's so interesting. You're talking about like berries and stuff, because my mom last year went and picked elderberry, and she prepared it, and she made an elderberry syrup. And then we would add just like water to that. My mom comes from a farm in Poland, and like, we really started getting into this whole idea of like foraging and like looking at foods and like prepping them and like honoring the plant. Like, it's just, I'm also I'm also an anthropology background. So, and minor in Indigenous studies, or the Indigenous peoples predominantly in Canada. And I just like loved kind of their conceptual model of health and looking at different cultures. And, we would think, oh, they're so, primitive or whatever, like all the things we used to think about that. And I just sit there and I'm like, there's such ancient wisdom here that like science now is like tapping into. Like, they didn't have the scientific words. They knew through their wisdom, through their, development. And like, what we really need to do is kind of go back to some of those old ways, like in a new way, right? Like, everything old becomes new, but like, we need to be taught some of this stuff, and we need to go back and like get reconnected with where food comes from and how it's made. And, I got a garden going this year. Like, I don't know how to garden, but I'm going to start to learn. And, I come out there and I water, and I'm taking my eggshells and I'm breaking them up to give them, foods and stuff. And I think we just really need to like reconnect to some simpler ways. But I'm just really mind blown right now. And let's talk about the gut pathway.
That was so good, because you basically set me up to talk about my next topic, which I love. When a podcast is in flow, it's like, woo, everything's in the flow. So yeah, that ancient traditions of proper food preparation is so my jam, because when I started to look into like, okay, so I'm going to cut out these sugary foods, processed foods, and I'm going to introduce whole foods into my diet. I came across a book which many of you may have heard about, which is The Plant Paradox by Dr. Stephen Gundry, right? And he talks about lectins, and I was like, okay. So I went into the research because I don't like to just take things for granted, at face value. And interestingly, lectins are a family of molecules made by plants, and I'm going to call them anti-nutrients. And lectins is just one of like a large family, which is plants, including whole grains and vegetables, not so much fruits, but mostly whole grains and vegetables. They make it inside of themselves to protect themselves from being overeaten by insects. Okay. And the thing is, if you go back to like traditional methods of how people would eat, it would be a lot of happy animal meat. Like what I mean by happy animal is like ranging, like clean kills in the forest, or, raised on a farm outside and pastured and, free range, all that kind of stuff. Right. And they would eat their vegetables and their grains, but they would properly prepare it. They would take time, like quinoa, for example. If you go to Peru, you don't just take quinoa and boil it and eat it. It's like a 3-day preparation process. I'm from Brazil. You don't just take beans and put them in a pot and cook them. You soak them for like at least overnight. Rice, white rice, right? First of all, why is it white? It's white because they take the husk off, so it's no longer brown, because the husk contains a lot of anti-nutrients. That's where the anti-nutrients are. It's usually the husk or the skin or the seeds, because that's the first layer of defense that the plant has against the insect, right? So they would take this, white rice, and they would soak it. Same thing in Asia. You soak it, and then after about 8 hours or so, you rinse it until the water comes clean, and then you cook it, right? Same thing with beans. You soak it, you rinse it, you cook it. So there's all of these ancient methods of food preparation, because they knew that these anti-nutrients that are found in our plants, when you eat them in large amounts and consistently day after day, what they actually do at the level of the gut is they damage the gut. Okay. And because we are larger than insects, it takes longer to see those effects. But I commonly will meet people who have like gone vegetarian or vegan, or increase, like they try to go healthy and they increase the consumption of whole foods, like non-processed foods. And they're okay at first and they're feeling great because they've gotten rid of the crap. However, they're slowly damaging their gut, and they run into problems with like bloating or constipation or diarrhea, or like a funny kind of weight gain around the belly area. Like there's these kind of issues that start to pop up, because those are signs that your gut or your gut lining is not being properly, protected. And I'm going to give one example just to kind of blow your mind, because sometimes you have to go a little bit deeper to really anchor a point. Nuts, right? Like so healthy, and, a handful of nuts a day keeps the doctor away. However, if you don't soak your nuts to start the germination process, the sprouting process in the nut, what happens is that the nut, if you just get it like off of the floor of the forest or whatever, right? It has a compound in it called phytic acid. And phytic acid is basically two minerals like together, like it's inositol and I'm blanking on the other one. I don't think it's zinc. Inositol and something else, okay? And inositol is like a really, really lovely compound for your body. In fact, people with PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, are told to take inositol because it's really good for hormone balancing. And when the inositol and the mineral are bound together as phytic acid, it doesn't get broken down in the gut, and it goes into the next part of the gut, which is the small intestine. So it's like you have you eat, there's the esophagus, your gut, the small intestine, the large intestine, which goes around your belly, and then you poop out through your rectum, right? And after your gut is a small intestine, which is a very delicate tissue of your gut where all of the absorption of your food and nutrients is supposed to happen primarily. Okay. And that very delicate lining of the gut, when phytic acid hits the lining of the gut, it actually damages, it changes the way that the lining of the gut works, like the integrity of it. So the lining of the gut, if you think of it like a coffee filter, right? you want to have the nutrients that are properly broken down seeping through. So it kind of seeps through into your body like a nice kind of, like a watery substance. And you want the crud, the stuff that isn't broken down, to stay in the gut and you poop it out, right? What happens though is that the phytic acid actually destroys the lining of the gut, so that now instead of having a nice intact coffee filter, there's like rips in it. So now things that are supposed to that can only get through, like iron can only get through the gut lining. It can't get through like a leaky part of the gut lining. It needs a specific transporter to transport it into the body. So one of the early signs of a problem with this gut damage or leaky gut is like the common term, but the medical term is increased intestinal permeability, where more things are getting through. It's more permeable. That's a medical term. One of the early signs is you start getting things like iron deficiencies, like low iron or like anemia, right? Because you're just not able to get your nutrients from your gut into your body through that gut lining because the gut lining has been damaged. So the gut lining can be damaged by things like these anti-nutrients. And when you soak a nut for a certain period of time, like it's at least 6 hours, ideally 12 hours, especially the bigger ones like walnuts and pecans, that kind of stuff. The phytic acid, the act of sprouting, when it starts to sprout, there's a chemical transformation in the nut because it's getting ready to become a tree, right? Like to sprout. And it breaks down the phytic acid into its two components, inositol and the mineral. And now, not only do they not create damage, they are also available to be absorbed into the body so your body can use it. So it's like a double win. You don't hurt yourself and you actually gain nutrition from that, and you gain nutrition from all of your foods because your lining is intact. Now, it's interesting that we started with plant anti-nutrients, right? Because you mentioned the idea of like getting back. So if you're an immigrant from another country into North America, as I was, if you go to your grandmothers or your great grandmothers, they'll tell you about soaking, sprouting, fermenting, pressure cooking, or cooking for long periods of time if they didn't have a pressure cooker. There were multiple steps involved, and some needed like significant steps. Like cassava is deadly if you don't. Kidney beans can kill. Like a raw kidney bean can kill you. It's got toxic stuff in it if you don't properly prepare it, right? However, what I would say that the primary problem that most people are having is that leaky gut, that damage to the gut, is happening from the chemicals and additives and preservatives in processed foods. Okay. Because the lining of the gut is protected by various factors. It's protected by a thick mucus layer, and it's protected by the microbiome, which is like the buddies in our belly. They're like the bacteria and viruses and fungi and, parasites even sometimes that live there. And when they're healthy, you're healthy. And when you're healthy, they're healthy. It's like this really beautiful symbiotic relationship. We've co-evolved with them, actually. If you decimate your microbiome, you would get sick very quickly. And the studies show whenever they look at the microbiome that a population that's healthy and a population that's unhealthy, like any population from autism to Alzheimer's, from multiple sclerosis to ALS to Parkinson's, they all have problems with the microbiome. We don't know what happened first. Did the microbiome get sick and we got sick, or did we get sick and they got sick? We're intricately connected. And when the microbiome is hurt, and it also, because they are responsible for maintaining the integrity of that coffee filter, that lining of the gut, that injures our lining of the gut. Okay. And so you can hurt them through having chemicals and additives and preservatives. And research has been done to show that they do harm the microbiome, and especially preservatives, right? Because preservatives are meant to kill organisms, right? Keep them from spoiling the food, while the microbiome are organisms. Our ancestors used natural preservation methods like fermentation, right? Canning, those kinds of things. And then they would use like honey in jam, not sugar, but they would use honey in jams, right? So they had these different ways of preserving. And so the only preservative that I'm like comfortable with, because it's really hard to it's hard to live in today's society if you're getting rid of everything that has preservatives, is if it's preserved with citric acid, which is like vitamin C, which is still not great, but it's better than sodium benzoate, for example. And And then there's all of these other additives like potassium bromides, which make our bread stay fresh on the shelf, like frankenfoods, which are staying longer than they should fresh on the shelf because they are being maintained with these chemicals. And these chemicals are known to damage, like it's hard to do the research on humans, obviously. The research is done on mammals, right? And so it's interesting to see how the parallels are definitely there. And when you go in and you assess the gut damage and the leaky gut and the microbiome, it is the common pattern that every single disease has like this interesting association with a dysfunction at the level of the gut. Okay. And remember that the gut is responsible for being able to absorb all the nutrients that your body needs to make hormones, right? It is a hormone producing gland itself. The microbiome makes hormones and the gut lining makes hormones. So your hormonal balance will be off if the gut lining is damaged and if the microbiome is damaged. And if you don't eat enough of the right kind of fiber, like whole foods fiber, that the fiber is actually used by the microbiome. Our body cannot use fiber. We don't break fiber down. It's like a resistant starch, right? Doesn't turn into sugar. It just stays in the gut. Our microbiome eats the fiber. And if you don't have enough fiber from whole foods, the microbiome starts to die off. And then they don't like to die, just like we don't like to die. So they'll start to eat the mucus lining in your gut, which can damage the gut. And the thing is, if you're like, oh, I'm going to go and have like Metamucil, like this very processed fiber, for example, or like, very refined fiber, too much of a good thing is a problem too, right? And you can actually develop problems with bloating because you're overfeeding your microbiome, right? And the sugar, it's not just that the sugar imbalances your blood. The sugar will cause certain organisms to overgrow, like Candida. Candida is meant to be in your body, by the way. Okay. It's when it grows out of control, out of proportion of what it should be. It's like any community. You don't want too many of like any community member. You want a well-balanced community. And so you need to keep your microbiome well-balanced. And the way that nature, we evolved over centuries, over, millions of years, hundreds, thousands of years, and then over the last few centuries. And our DNA has really not changed that significantly since about 20,000 years ago, right? And our evolution with the biggest evolution we ever made recently with the microbiome was when we went from hunters and gatherers to agricultural. And I'm fascinated by anthropology. If you look at the bones of the hunter-gatherers and the agricultural, there's an interesting study where they found burial sites of these two tribes. One was still hunter-gatherer and the other one had become agricultural, like farming, at the same time in the same place from the same genetic background. Just one group decided they wanted to like interior decorate their homes, so they wanted to stay in one place. Like, I don't know why, but they decided to do it. Their bones are so much weaker and more brittle and smaller, and they healed slower and they broke faster, like when they studied those bones, whereas the hunter-gatherers were like these big, strong, robust, beautiful bones that healed so quickly, right? So really, my kind of like where the space that I'm at is really helping women as a women's health expert. I help women through these podcasts and through my Facebook group, Wild Wisdom for Women with Dr. Patricia Mills, my podcast, Wild Wisdom, and my Instagram account at dr.patriciamills. I am constantly sharing this wisdom and approaching it in different ways and giving examples, particularly my Facebook group, of like, how do you eat ketchup? How do you have like ketchup for your kids and barbecues in the summer without throwing off your hormonal balance and that of your kids? And the cool thing is that there are solutions. Some of them actually are pre-made for us, like convenience foods, and some of them you have to do yourself. Which requires a little bit more advanced planning. Like if you're going to soak something, you got to think about it the night before or that morning, right? Like this morning, I took my rice and I soaked it, because I'm going to cook it tonight. But then the actual act of cooking is not that different.
So two things. One was a question regarding the nuts. So because I like to prepare this breakfast meal, which is like rolled oats with coconut milk and almond milk and cinnamon, and I use pecans and almonds with that. you're saying that I should soak those for 24 hours ish, and then cut it up and then put it in and then I could put it into this,
I'll tell you exactly what you have to do actually. Yeah. So there's a few missing steps that'll make all the difference for you there. First of all, you have to soak your oats, right? So you have to take your oats the night before, put it in water, and soak it overnight. I like to put a little yeast probiotic in there that eats up all the simple sugars, like the loose flour. It's a Saccharomyces boulardii is the probiotic. You can buy it at any health food store. Just open the capsule, put it in, and it just does a gentle fermentation as well, which is really nice because when that kind of yeast, which is a very healthy yeast for our body, eats sugar, it poops out vitamin Bs. So it becomes like not only soaked and starting to sprout the oat, like germinate, which releases the oat nutrients and decreases the oat anti-nutrients because oat has anti-nutrients as well. Then the next day you can drain it if you want, or you can just take that that water and use it as your cooking water. Okay. So that's first, you have to soak your oats. The next thing is, in order to properly prepare nuts, you have two options. You can you soak them overnight, which is 12 hours or over the day. You put in a tablespoon of sea salt into the water, okay? Which, and if you're worried about mold, like some nuts are more mold prone, like Brazil nuts, which are really high in selenium, which is great for your thyroid, as an example, but they tend towards mold. So putting in like a 1/8 of a teaspoon of baking soda will help get that mold under control.
Yeah, mostly use pecans and almonds. Yeah.
Well, interestingly, pecans, I've come across a few batches, which after a while you get used to looking, and they're like, if they're a little bit sticky, they might have some mold to them, so that's something that you would want to do. And actually, if you put in baking soda into your nuts, it doesn't do any harm. And if you put in baking soda into your beans, it decreases the gas producing molecules. So that's kind of a neat tip because sometimes like beans, the fart, fruit. Totally. But then you soak it. So back to the nuts, you soak it. And then the thing is, their nuts are kind of like gross when they're soggy. If you're making like an almond milk yourself or a cashew milk, then you can take that and put it in the blender. You don't have to dry it out again. You just get it wet. However, if you wanted to have it as a nice crunchy thing you want to then put it on a glass baking dish, spread it out, turn your oven to the very lowest temperature, which for me is 170 degrees.
Yeah, I think really that's low. Fine. Yeah.
Yeah. And you just let it sit there for the day or the night. Okay. And at the end of it, they should be crispy, like dry, really dry. And the nice thing is, if you eat a nut before you prepare it compared to after, the taste of the crispy nuts is like butter because it has no more bitterness in it. The anti-nutrients, if you really pay attention, they taste bitter.
Yeah.
So, but you don't know because you would
thinking
know that.
I'm making this healthy breakfast meal. Actually, it's a JJ Virgin recipe I got from her. Except you're talking about like the food prep. Like it just astounds me, like the wisdom that we have lost around food that like is brilliant. And that led me to the second point I wanted to mention. And I don't know if you've read about this, but I am so intrigued and fascinated by this book called Braiding Sweetgrass. It's by Robin Wall Kimmerer. So she is a Potawatomi. She comes from Potawatomi community, and she's a botanist, an indigenous botanist. And her book is like the teachings of the plants, but also teachings for how we it's not just to say, oh, you need to take care of the plant because this is what it does. It's like she gives us advice on like how we can begin to reconnect with nature, reconnect with plants, reconnect with our gardens and all of these beautiful things. So that's a total side note for like book club. I think you would love it. I'm just loving the stories and the information about plants. And that's what's motivating me to like grow my thing. And, and it brings me back to also like my Polish roots. Like we used to can everything. We didn't have refrigerators, and like we had to keep our potatoes down in the cold cellar, and like grandma used to do this. And like, I've lost that, like I have no idea how to do any of that. Like, thankfully my mom does. And so like, I'm going to have to hit her up for that, because now I see the wisdom of holding on to those ancient traditional wisdoms of us being connected to our food, connected to nature, because it is the greatest teacher. It tells us how to be healthy. And so she talks about like how to prepare, cattails, and like all the different uses of cattails and how we can eat it and what it's really good for. And it's also medicine. And anyways, I think you would just love it. So that was a total side note and a plug for her book.
Thank you. I'm definitely going to look into that, because I love to geek out on that kind of stuff. And what's really cool is that all of these traditional methods of preparation have been proven in research. So if you actually look for research that has been done on the effects of sprouting, soaking, fermenting, germination, all those sorts of things, it is astounding. Like, it's all there. Like, you decreased anti-nutrients by 80% when you do proper soaking, sprouting, and fermenting, and they've measured those amounts, right? And they've even done studies on like lentils. And a lot of the research comes out from India, actually, because India is a very plant-based country in general. So they're always very interested in knowing, like, is this actually healthy for us and what's the best way to prepare? So a lot of really interesting research from Indian universities on these things. So I'm creating an all-in-one complete guide to proper food preparation, because right now when I'm like helping people, I have to direct them to like 5 different resources, and I realized that I really needed to make an all-encompassing one complete guide. I can just be like, here you go. And then you just have that in your kitchen. And no matter, the thing is, a lot of the recipes that are out there, I notice, are very quote unquote healthy, as you say, the breakfast recipe. However, if you don't properly prepare it over time, you're probably going to run into problems. And I'm seeing a little bit of that happening in the health world, where people in the health space are not presenting with like the best of health as they age. And I'm always curious about that, because I'm always observing myself, like, is what I'm doing, is my method working? Because if it's not working, I have to reassess my method, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just an interesting thing to notice. And so I think one of the missing pieces is this proper food preparation, because everyone's got the process, don't eat processed foods kind of down, although people don't understand that it's actually very damaging at the level of the gut and the microbiome. Other things that hurt the microbiome is antibiotics and anti-inflammatories like ibuprofen. So remember, I was chewing ibuprofen,
yeah.
Right? And the thing is, you can't avoid antibiotics. I almost died from meningitis as a child. I had IV antibiotics for 2 weeks. Thank God for IV antibiotics. And I didn't know at the time, no one really knew that you had to replenish, like recover from this event and replenish the microbiome and work to like rebuild the gut lining, which was definitely damaged during that time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a run in with H. pylori, and I did the antibiotic route. And it was interesting because I listened to a podcast that was talking about it being a very ancient gut microbiome. And in fact, highly protective against acid reflux and all kinds of issues. And something in my mind clicked and went, you know what? I actually don't need to annihilate you. I annihilated you. You came back. Because it was a whole slew of other things. And my whole approach was completely different. I went the natural route, and so amazing how my body responded when I put all the lifestyle. I slowed down my work. I meditated. I gave myself rest. I took more time to prepare my food and spend time on my relations. And I took some supplements to support that. But it's just so interesting because my naturopath was like, as soon as a doctor sees you test positive for H. pylori, you're going on antibiotics. And I was like, well, that's not helpful. Anyways, total sidebar, but I'm loving what you are talking about. So we've gone over time, and like, I'm totally fine with that. And we could probably jam this out for so much longer. And I literally asked you like the first question. You've answered some of my other questions that I had, but like, this was one of the most intriguing conversations I have had in a very long time. But I want to know this because I can't be the only one right now that's like, okay, when you prepare that food prep thing, I want in. So what else do you have for people right now who are just like, I'm just loving what she's saying. I realize I know nothing. I would like to know more. Like, where do people find you? How do they like work with you? How do we learn more?
So thank you so much, Madelaine. I really enjoyed this conversation. This time just flew by. It was so lovely. Such great energy. What I have for you, the listener, a free gift. It's my ebook that I poured a lot of love and heart and soul into it. There's a lot of amazing golden nuggets. And if you actually take this on and download the ebook and follow what I recommend, like if you have that motivation, remember I said those women that I saw the changes in, you have to take action. That's up to you. But the roadmap I provide, okay? And it's a wonderful place to begin. And for many of you, just downloading that ebook and following what I recommend will be enough. For others, you may need more support. For all of you, what I would like to do is invite you into my private Facebook group for women, Wild Wisdom for Women with Dr. Patricia Mills, MD, if you're on Facebook. If not, make a fake account and join. And I love to hang out on Instagram as well, at dr.patriciamills. But I'll provide the link for the free ebook to Madelaine. And it's really foundational. It's a really amazing, very highly effective, like we are busy women often without a lot of time. And you just want to make sure that the time you are dedicating is going to give you results. And I put in a lot of results driven, actionable strategies there, as well as the knowledge behind it. Because what I find is that while women want the action steps, they're more likely to take it. We are more likely to take action if we actually understand why, right?
Yep.
So
100%.
And that's my big thing is just, I love explaining things. So I'm on YouTube, Dr. Patricia Mills, MD, and I just sit there and I love to just explain topics to people, and give lots of actionable strategies.
That is so amazing. Like I'm not going to lie. That's like what I'm going to do first because I'm absolutely fascinated and I feel like in total alignment with like the way that you're approaching health, like this whole idea of health and wellness. And I think we need to go back into like, that really holistic mind, body, spirit, emotions, like all of that, like that's not like woo-woo stuff. It's like rooted in science. You need to regulate your nervous system. You need to manage your stress. You need to get in connection with your emotions. You need community. We need people in our lives. It is so important for our health. Food, connection back to nature, getting back to learning about plants, understanding how they work and what they have solutions for us. So like, I'm going to go download that thing. And so for anybody who's listening, all of that will be in the show notes. All the links will be there, the social media links, the link to the ebook, the link to, YouTube, everything will be there. So highly, highly recommend people to have a listen. And Patricia, I just, I really want to thank you for this conversation. It's very timely for like where I am in my like exploration of health and wellness. And it just like this conversation just, I just couldn't lean into the screen anymore on how interested I am. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Madelaine. It was absolutely my pleasure. And thank you so much for having me on your show and for introducing me to your lovely listeners. And and I love following you on Instagram. Actually, I have a really good time with that. You're so magnetic and you love what you do and it shows. So thank you for what you do for women, which is so crucial and important as well.
Yeah, thanks again. And thank you for everybody who listened. And please be sure to share this this is like the critical, like everybody, that has a uterus and ovaries, like really needs to listen to this because it's just like such foundational knowledge. And like, we don't understand how all this works because nobody tells us. Well, Dr. Patricia is telling us all about it. So please share out the episode, follow her, comment with her, do her stuff. And like, let's all live a well, this is all about living a better life. So let's all live a better life.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to this podcast, Wild Wisdom with Dr. Patricia Mills. If you like this podcast, please take the time to like and subscribe, and please feel free to leave any comments and look below for the contact information if you want to connect with me directly. Thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful day, evening, or night.
Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Just a reminder, this podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast is not a substitute for a professional care doctor or other qualified medical professional. This podcast is provided with the understanding that it does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services. If you are looking for help in your journey, it is important that you seek out a qualified health practitioner. If you would like to work with Dr. Patricia for her expert health transformation guidance, please email her at info@drpatriciamills.com to book a discovery call. You can also find Dr. Patricia on Instagram at Dr. Patricia Mills and Facebook at Wild Wisdom for Women with Dr. Patricia Mills, MD. For access to all of Dr. Patricia's educational videos and more amazing perks, consider becoming a Patreon member. Links are in the description of this episode. It is important to have an expert in your corner that can help you make the changes you crave, especially when it comes to your health.